What's good, y'all? It's Stinger, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make some dark, sinister, evil, cinematic Spanish guitar loops that sound like they're right out of a Quentin Tarantino movie. So without any further ado, let's just get right to it. So here we have the main Spanish guitar. Now I'm going to go through and break down piece by piece what the process was in order to make this melody. So whenever I start a melody, I always start with the bass line, and this specific bass line is a 1, 4, 6, 5. I love using this chord progression whenever I'm trying to go with something dark and evil, and this chord progression really makes the melody wrap up nicely towards the end. After I laid out the bass line, I threw some chords on them an octave higher, and this is what they sound like. One tip that will make your beats a lot more dark and suspenseful is by using the same top note but with different chords. Doing this just adds that little bit of tension that fits in beautifully with the melody. I forgot to mention, but for this melody I'm using the Ample Guitar L, which is a great acoustic guitar VST. There is a free alternative, it's called AGML, but I don't think it sounds nearly as good as this one. After I had those chords laid out, I built a little rhythm based on the notes of the chord. This is what it sounds like. So basically what I did to create this pattern is I took the notes of the chords and offset them a little bit to give it some rhythm. I also made use of these tension notes, which are notes that are one step away from each other in the chord. When making dark beats like this, it's definitely a plus to use those tension notes. I also added in some transition notes, which also play with the same concept as the tension notes. So for the transition from this first chord to the second chord, I have it going from B to A, which are notes that are one note away from each other in the scale. And then from the second chord to the third chord, I have it going from B to C, which are also one note away from each other in the scale. And then to go from the third chord to the fourth chord, you guessed it, I used a transition note that is one note away from each other in the scale, going from the D to the B. Something that I've been doing in my melodies to give it a little bit more resolve is creating a transition from the last chord to the first chord. And the transition from the last chord to the first chord is going from F sharp to E. Doing this wraps up your melody really nicely and also transitions into the next section of the melody. So after we had that basic rhythm laid out, I added in some higher notes to give it a little bit more complexity. I also added in this little third note flare, which is very prevalent in flamenco guitars. So this is what the final melody sounds like. Now you'll see with these higher notes, I'm also playing with the same transition aspect as the last rhythmic pattern. All the higher note transitions are one note away from each other in this scale as the next note. And I'm doing this for all of them. From here, it's F sharp to E. From here, it's B to C. From here, it's C to B. And then yet again, from here, it's F sharp to E sharp. The way I build these higher note melodies is by taking the note that I want to transition to and building a melody off of that. So I'll make it in reverse. I know where my destination wants to be, so I'll build a melody based off of that. So here I took the A, the G, and the F, and that transitions really nicely into the E. Working in reverse like this really makes making your counter melodies so much easier. So now that we've got the guitar out of the way, we can cover the next portion of the melody, being the brass. For this trumpet sound, I use BBC Symphonic Orchestra, which is a free VST. If you wait 30 days, I think you have to be put on a waiting list. If you don't want to be put on a waiting list, I think it's like $40 or $50. I'd say it's well worth the money. I use it so much. So this is what the trumpets sound like. So to create this lead, I took the fifth of every chord that was playing in the guitar melody and threw them on here. So the B is the fifth of the first chord, the E is the fifth of the second chord, the G is the fifth of the third chord, and the F sharp is the fifth of the fourth chord. Jeez. And here we are yet again playing with those transition notes. It's sounding really repetitive at this note, but it just works. As you can see, the F sharp and the E are one note away from each other in the scale, as are the F sharp and the G, and the E and the F sharp, as well as the C and the B. It sounds really redundant because I'm saying it so much it's kind of losing its meaning, but I really want to nail in the fact that using these transition notes makes your melody so much more full and complete. Yet again, for the next portion of the melody, we're using BBC Symphonic Orchestra. I'm using the violins 1 on the tremolo setting. And this is what the strings sound like. To get this melody, I just copied the main chord progression that I was building my guitar off of and threw it into the strings. Pretty simple stuff. And the next portion of the melody, which is my favorite, is the ghostly choir from Arcade. These are just some really soothing vocals that add a really nice lead aspect to the melody, and this is what they sound like. Now you may have noticed that this last vocal kind of cuts off abruptly and it doesn't really provide much resolution. So what I did is I took another vocal, which is basically just the tail end of that first vocal, and added it to the beginning. So there's yet again a transition from the end to the beginning. So without the vocal playing in the beginning, the end of the melody sounds like this. And it kind of just ends off at a cliffhanger, but by throwing that melody in the beginning, it wraps up the melody really beautifully. And the last portion of this melody is this custom bass that I made in Serum. I use the anti-stasis waveform, and I have an LFO routed to the asymmetric knob. And then I also have a sub bass with a sine wave. For the effects, I have some dimension, distortion, some phaser to give it a little bit of width, and a filter with the drive up and the cutoff all the way up. This is definitely an underrated trick when it comes to making custom basses, because putting that drive up gives it a lot more grittiness and low end. So this is what the bass sounds like. So now we've got all the portions of the melody. This is what it sounds like all together. So now that we've got making the melody out of the way, let's get into mixing the melody. For the main guitar, I just have reverb on the basic setting, Fruity Delay 2 on the widen setting to give it a little bit more stereo separation, and a couple of EQs to take out some unwanted frequencies. If you're making a melody and you hear some frequencies that just are either ringing too loudly or have a little bit too much resonance, a great way to get rid of those is to grab one of your EQ parameters and use the scroll wheel to scroll all the way down until it's at 0%. Next, you can make a notch and scroll through all the frequencies, and if you hear one that doesn't sound good, boom, you just throw it down. On the trumpet, I have an EQ taking out the low end, some reverb on the basic setting, and then some more EQs taking out some unwanted frequencies. Now for the string, I have the same thing as those other melodies, EQ taking out the low end, reverb, and then I also have Valhalla Supermassive on the 80s mod room. This is a super underrated free reverb that I use a bunch if I want some really big, really clean sounding reverbs. For the vocals, the mixing is pretty standard. I really don't need to go into it. And then for the sub bass, I just have a fast distortion on the A panel. What I do want to get into is the master melody mixing. So what I do when I make my melodies is I'll take all the melodic components that aren't basses. So that would be the vocals, the string, the brass, and the guitar. And I route them all to one channel by using right click and route to this track only. Now instead of these just playing on the master, they'll be routed to this channel, which is routed to the master. By doing this, we can mix all of our melodic components at once, and it just saves a whole lot of time. On this, I have the forever underrated OTT at 45% depth. This one plugin makes a huge difference. This is what the melody sounds like without OTT. And this is what the melody sounds like with OTT. As you can see, there is a huge difference. It makes the melody so much more full and so much more bright. So that's gonna pretty much cover how to make some amazing flamenco Spanish guitar melodies. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them, and feel free to subscribe if you learned anything new today. Other than that, that's gonna be it. Peace.